All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are Locked On Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman. Today, the Atlanta Falcons veteran players reported to training camp, and we're going to be talking about if the Falcons are really going to be as bad as 2-15 this year, and whether or not the Falcons will be helped or hurt by allowing Cordarrelle Patterson to break the all-time kickoff return touchdown record.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, and of course, the host of this world-renowned Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And we thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen each and every day. Of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available Monday through Friday on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and of course on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube, hit that bell, hit that like, and you'll get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. And if you're watching us on YouTube as we speak and you're noticing, does that Julio Jones picture look extra crooked today? Of course it is. Yes, I just literally 5 minutes ago, before jumping on to record this episode, I found out the news that Julio was signing with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I decided to make that picture extra crooked. I might have to take it down now. And it's a sad day. What, like, Julio, why are you doing this to us, man? You know, first Kiki, now you know, Devontae talking about being a Saints fan last year. Like, come on, man. Like, you guys, you're killing me, man. You're killing me. But we won't be talking about that on today's episode. We'll be talking about the USA Today putting out their season projections and had the Falcons with the worst record in the NFL at 2-15. We'll talk about sort of how and why the Falcons could up in those expectations, similar to what they did in 2008 when they had low expectations. Then we'll sort of talk about whether or not it would be so bad if the Falcons went 2-15 this year. And we'll get into whether or not in the long run it's a good idea that the Falcons might tank. And then we'll also be talking about Cordarrelle Patterson and his goal to break the all-time kickoff return touchdown record. He's currently tied for the lead and has an opportunity to break that record this season. But we'll talk about whether or not the Falcons, is it in their best interest to allow him to do that. And we'll get into all of that on today's episode. But, you know, again, getting back to that 2-15 record, you know, that comes off of the heels of, you know, Cody Benjamin of CBS Sports saying that the Falcons had the worst roster in the NFL. And, you know, of course, Falcon fans across the world, and myself included, we're supposed to do our best Stephen A. Smith impressions and be like, this is preposterous. This is egregious to have the Falcons this lowly rated and whatnot. But if I'm being completely honest, like, I don't look at that 2-15 record prediction as like as egregious or as preposterous, because personally I have the Falcons finishing like 4-13 this year. So 2-15 isn't like crazy off the mark in my eyes. But obviously, we all kind of hope and believe and want to believe that the Falcons will be better this season. And it's reminiscent of the time back in 2008 where people had extremely low expectations for the Falcons. And a lot of people were projecting them to have really poor records and be the worst team in football that year. And they obviously went 11-5 that season. I had to go and dust off my old magazines. This one is CBS Sports and Pro Football Weekly's 2008 preview. They have the Falcons projected, if you can tell on the video, at 3-13 that year. Hope that's clear. The Sporting News with, you know, none other than Matt Ryan as the head, and they had the Falcons at 1-15 in their preview breakdown that year, in large part due to how polarizing draft pick Matt Ryan and people having low expectations given their 4-12 record the previous year. And the Falcons obviously wound up blowing away those expectations with their 11-5 record and going to the postseason and losing to the Arizona Cardinals, the eventual NFC champions. And that was spearheaded by none other than Matt Ryan, who was one of the more efficient quarterbacks in the league that year, looking at metrics like adjusted net yards per attempt or ANYA. It was 7.01 that season, which was the fourth highest in the league that year. For the sake of comparison, a 7.101 ANYA in 2021 would have ranked 10th, smack dab between Patrick Mahomes, who's 7.07 last year, and Justin Herbert's 6.95. Now, what's interesting, we talked about before the sort of parallels between Matt Ryan and Desmond Ridder, sort of going into a situation where people had low expectations, exceeding those expectations, given both guys are known mainly for their intangibles rather than necessarily their great physical gifts, say, a Malik Willis or like some other, top quarterbacks over the years that have been drafted, like a Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes in that same category. But if you're betting on the Falcons to, basically pull a 2008 and, go 11-5 or something close to it, I don't know if you're really betting on Desmond Ridder basically pulling a Matt Ryan, right? I think you're really betting on Marcus Mariota because all expectations are that Mariota will be the week one starter. And so if this team is going to have that level of a success, they're going to have to get off to a good start this year. And presumably that will be with Mariota, sort of hitting the ground running this season. Now, I've seen Marcus Mariota or Mariota, for those of you that want me to pronounce it the correct way or whatever. I'm going to call him Mariota. Mama called him Mariota. I'm going to call him Mariota. But we have seen him play at put up similar efficiency numbers at various points in his career. His second season in 2016, he had an ANYA of 7.14. His one really outstanding performance with the Raiders against the Chargers in 2020, he had a ANYA of 7.18. I'm not, while that game was impressive and shows signs of progress from Mariota, I'm not going to necessarily pin all my hopes on one sort of performance against a relatively bad Chargers team that was like 4-9 at that point in the season, coming off a sort of comeback from behind win against a rough Falcons team that year as sort of a thing that can be repeatable for a full 17 games. So focusing on that 2016 season more, the notable thing about that 2016 Titans team was how much of their offense was facilitated by the run game, similar to what we saw with Matt Ryan under Michael Turner. Right. The 2016 Titans were leaning heavily on DeMarco Murray, who had 1,200 yards rushing that year, over 1,200 yards rushing that year, made the Pro Bowl that year. They had some rookie by the name of Derrick Henry or something like that. He had nearly 500 yards that season. They also got another 350 yards from Mariota, so that the Titans rushing offense was the third best rushing offense in the league that year based off of, total yards and whatnot. And that 2008 Falcons rushing offense was second in the league, spearheaded by Michael Turner's 1,699 yards rushing that earned him a Pro Bowl, that earned him an All-Pro spot as well. So essentially, the argument you've heard me make on this podcast in the past and probably will continue to make, that if the Falcons are going to far exceed these 2-15 expectations this year, it's going to be not really because you're betting on Mariota or Desmond Ridder being, these superstar quarterbacks. It's going to be because the Falcons can run the football at a high level, and that will allow those quarterbacks to put their best foot forward, as we saw Mariota do early in his career, as we saw Matt Ryan do right off the bat in his NFL career. And so that's really a bet. If you're going to make that bet that the Falcons will do that, that's a bet on Tyler Allgeier. That's a bet on the Falcons offensive line. Now, betting on Tyler Allgeier is not a bad bet. We had Trevor Sikkema of Pro Football Focus on this podcast back in May, talking about the reasons why he thought Tyler Allgeier, was his fourth best ranked running back in the draft class. He's not alone in that. A number of people had Tyler Allgeier as one of the higher ranked running backs in this past year's draft class. And so the hope is that he can exceed his expectations as a day 3 5th round pick. We've mentioned Jordan Howard, who immediately came into the league as a 5th round pick back in 2016, had 1,300 yards rushing as a rookie. I've heard other people compare Tyler Allgeier favorably to Alfred Morris, who had 1,600 yards rushing as a rookie back in 2012. So it's not unheard of for a late round running back like a Tyler Allgeier to come in right away and have success. Although notably that 2016 Bears team with Jordan Howard only finished 3-13 that year. So hopefully we're more Alfred Morris than Jordan Howard in that from a team standpoint. But also on the offensive line front, you're betting on, we talked about Kaleb McGary grading out according to PFF, as a top 5 run blocking tackle in the final 8 weeks of the season. And so you're hoping he lives up to that. We know PFF was very favorable when it came to grading out Matt Hennessy and Drew Dalman as run blockers last year, grading both of those guys among the top 5 centers in the league. And while, I think both of those guys did solid work as run blockers, same thing with Caleb McGarry. I don't know if I would consider their performance from my film study as elite in that sort of regard, but hopefully if you're betting on this offensive line, that those grades will look more accurate this year than they seem to look to most of our eyes a year ago. And then also, of course, you're also betting on Jalen Mayfield. You're betting on Jake Matthews having one of his best run blocking seasons that he's had in the last 3 or 4 years. And of course, Chris Lindstrom continuing to be one of the top guards in the NFL. And if you get all those things going together, then you could have the sort of stability and consistency that the run game can provide that will then sort of take the pressure off of the quarterback, whether that's a Mariota, whether that's a Desmond Ridder, to have that high level play. And the Falcons could vastly exceed that 2-15 projection, and certainly vastly exceed that 4-13 projection that I have for the team. And even if all of those things don't come true, if just some of them come true, I think it's a pretty safe bet that the Falcons will be better than 2-15 this year. So we'll just have to wait and see if the Falcons running game and Tyler Allgeier can live up to that. I know Cordarrelle Patterson is also part of that conversation, but we'll talk about some of the reasons why he may not be sort of the facilitator of that sort of rushing success to the same degree that Tyler Allgeier later on today's episode. But coming up on today's episode, we'll talk about, whether or not it would be so bad if the Falcons finish 2-15. And we'll get into the whole tanking conversation as we continue today's Locked On Falcons, guys. But before we get there, we all are in tight financial situations, maybe not Julio Jones, given all the money that he's made over the years, but those of us mere mortals, money can be tight and you're living paycheck to paycheck. And when those unexpected expenses come up, that can be very problematic for you, but you don't have to worry about those stressful situations when money is in a pinch anymore with Dave. And Dave's not a person. Dave is a banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. There's no interest or credit check needed. Millions have already downloaded the Dave app, and you can too by going to the App Store and download Dave. That's DAVE, and sign up for an extra cash account and get $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve, member FDIC. Your future you will thank you. So our next subject is talking about whether or not the Falcons would be that bad. Would it be a bad thing? Would it be a terrible thing? Let's say it would be bad, but would it be terrible if the Falcons went 2-15 this year? If the USA Today proved to be accurate and the Falcons did go 2-15 and did have the number 1 overall pick. And I'm reminded of a scene from, I believe, the second Austin Powers movie where Dr. Evil has built his laser on the moon. He's threatened to blow up the earth. And he calls up the president of the United States, played by Tim Robbins, and he threatens him. And then Tim Robbins is like, I got nukes out the yin yang, let me just launch one at the moon, right? To blow up Dr. Evil. And then one of his generals is like, Mr. President, are you seriously suggesting blowing up the moon? And he goes, would you miss it? And I sit here and I go, similarly, if the Falcons went 2-15, would it be so bad? Right? Now, it would certainly stink in the long term, but would it set them up for better long-term success? I don't know. Right? But, I'm generally not an advocate for tanking. But there's one exception to that, as is always the exception. There's always exceptions, right? 2 eternal exceptions, right? The first exception to all things related to football are the Patriots, right? Whenever Tom Brady or Bill Belichick or the New England Patriots come up in conversation, they're always the exception to the rules. All the other rules apply to all the other 31 teams except for the Patriots. And then there's always a quarterback. When we talk about anything, positional value, all these various things, you wouldn't give up multiple first-round picks for, except for when it's a quarterback, right? And so that's the case when it comes to tanking. Doesn't make sense to tank. Draft position doesn't really matter all that much, except for when it comes to the quarterback, because we know there's overwhelming evidence that the higher you pick a quarterback, the greater your chances of hitting on that quarterback. Now, we know that picking high doesn't guarantee you success with that. That's proof by just looking at several of the NFC South quarterbacks. Obviously you got Tom Brady, a 6th round pick, but you have Marcus Mariota, a number 2 overall pick, Jameis Winston, number 1 overall pick from that 2015 draft, Baker Mayfield, the number 1 overall pick from 2018, Sam Darnold, the number 3 overall pick from 2018. So clearly, we're hoping Mariota, plays better than the rest of those guys, but all of those guys are on their second teams in the NFL. Mariota, in the case, 3rd team in the NFL, because they didn't quite work out. And so therefore, as top 3 picks, they weren't guaranteed success. But despite that, even despite labeling all these guys as busts or whatever you want to call them, if you want to call them that, still they're better options than the later round quarterbacks that were drafted in those years, like Sean Mannion and Trevor Siemian or Kyle Aletta and Mason Rudolph. Danny Etling, of course, being the one exception, because of course he was drafted by the Patriots, right? But you sit there and you go, like, you want to take a chance on a quarterback, right? And if you're drafting high, you're picking number 1, you have the best opportunity to hit on that long-term quarterback. Or, let's say that you're not interested in taking a quarterback. Instead, you're looking at, and I got to say it, the streak continues. We're going to keep this thing going for as long as we possibly can. You could still take a non-quarterback number 1 overall, coming off a 2-15 season. And of course, that's Alabama pass rusher Will Anderson or Georgia pass rusher Jalen Carter. And then you decide to roll with Desmond Ridder, because in a world where the Falcons do go 2-15 this year, you'll probably be telling yourself, 6 months from now, well, yeah, our quarterback play was terrible this past year, but why was that? Because the offensive line didn't live up to the expectations that we just talked about them living up to. That the reason why your offense, you were so bad to go 2-15 was because you probably gave up like 60 plus sacks this year. And I know a lot of people sit here and think that having a mobile quarterback like Mariota and Desmond Ridder is going to automatically lead to this team giving up less sacks. I think you're probably need to check your facts a little bit and do a little bit more research on that. I think if you do think the Falcons are going to give up less than 40 sacks this year, I think you're probably setting yourself up for disappointment this year. But, hopefully it's not too much more than 40 sacks this upcoming season. But you could come to the conclusion like, oh, let's go out there and buy that offensive line in next offseason. And that obviously I've mentioned before on the podcast that has its own traps. But again, get that big time pass rusher, roll with Desmond Ridder, build an offensive line, and then move on from there. Not to mention, if you have a 2-15 season, you probably would wind up concluding maybe Arthur Smith's not the guy, by year's end, right? Maybe he's not the coach that we all hoped he would be. Now, obviously, that's not the preferred outcome, right? But at least you would like to have a definitive answer, right? The preferred outcome is this team being good and making the playoffs, right? But if you don't do that, wouldn't the second best outcome behind that preferred outcome be kind of bottoming out? Because kind of last place you want to be is no man's land, where the Falcons, win 5 or 6 games this year. And, what do you really learn about this team in that situation? Now, again, I'm making the case for tanking. I'm not necessarily really at this point in time, like, let's talk in mid-September to see where I'm at this point in time. But I think you can make a pretty compelling case that if you're not going to be this 9 or 10 win team this year, that being 2-15 is relatively speaking one of the better outcomes that you could have, second or third, maybe the bronze medal when it comes to some of the outcomes that you could have this year. So you guys tell me. I'm open to hearing your feedback, where you stand on that. Do you feel like, that type of season would be as horrible as it seems to be at face value? Or, do you think, winning 4 or 5 or 6 games would be significantly better than that? Leave a comment. Hit me up via email, lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Hit me up on Twitter or Facebook at lockedonfalcons. But, I know for me, even though I'm not necessarily all in on tanking, I'm not, but I'm intrigued by the possibility of getting Will Anderson, adding a big time pass rusher like that, so that we can just go and wreck Tom Brady. Just one more shot at Tom Brady. Like he's going to play this year, he'll play next year. He'll hang it up at 45 after he's up 45 or whatever the case may be, and we can go full circle. You don't advocate for players getting injured, but Tom Brady, you know, I'm willing to make another exception for Tom Brady, the former New England Patriot. His career can go full circle. He got on the field because Mo Lewis ruptured Drew Bledsoe's spleen. Let's Will Anderson just rupture Tom Brady's spleen. He'll be fine, right? TB12, all the avocado ice cream. His immune system may not be great, but he'll make it up with the TB12 method. You can live without a spleen, all that sort of stuff. He'll be fine. Just rupture his spleen, knock him out, and let's see what Kyle Trask can do, right? Let's do that. Let's see what Kyle Trask can do throwing the football to Julio Jones next year or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. These are the dreams I have. I don't know. Or do you have these same dreams? Let me know, please, by all means. But we'll wrap up today's episode talking about, Cordarrelle Patterson's potential to break the record for the most kickoff return touchdowns in NFL history, and whether that's a good or a bad thing. Should the Falcons give him that opportunity? And we'll talk about some of the reasons, the pros and cons of that coming up on today's episode. But before we get there, guys, I do want to let you know about the number one source for all your sports betting needs and info. That is, of course, betonline.net. BetOnline has the latest odds, contests, player props, you name it. Whether you want to bet on Major League Baseball, UFC, boxing, esports, Vegas casino games, NHL, NBA, NFL, you want to bet on the Falcons going over or under 4.5 wins this season. You want to bet on the Bucks going over or under 11.5 wins this season based off of what this guy's doing. Next year you can bet the under when Will Anderson ruptures Tom Brady's spleen. You didn't hear that from me, but all you got to do is go over to the website at betonline.net to take advantage of all the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So, guys, before we wrap up today's episode, I want to remind you guys to check out Locked On Sports Atlanta as your second listen after you've made Locked On Falcons your first listen. Of course, you can find Locked On Sports Atlanta on all your preferred podcast platforms that you listen to or watch Locked On Falcons. And you can check out the 3 shows devoted to local sports as well as national sports on the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast, as well as the Locked On Braves postcast, breaking down every Braves win, every Braves loss. And of course, you'll be able to check out the Locked On Falcons postcast for upcoming Falcons games. Hopefully more wins than losses, unless wink. But you can check that out all on your preferred podcast platform. So, what's notable about Cordarrelle Patterson is he is tied for the all-time lead in terms of 8 kickoff return touchdowns with Josh Cribbs and Leon Washington. He said, as he reported to camp today, that he needs to break that record. His quote was, I've got a record to break, man. I need one more before I can hang it up back there. Man, if I get one more, I'll stop doing it. So for obvious reasons, you want Cordarrelle Patterson to have that opportunity to get that incredible accomplishment, to basically put his stamp of approval on being the best kickoff returner in NFL history. And like today, I'm not really going to argue whether or not he should or should not get that opportunity. I'll let you guys decide. Obviously, this regime has that choice to make, but I think you can make a case either way that he should or should not get that opportunity. Obviously, last year, he started out the season as the Falcons kickoff return specialist and then suffered an injury in week 10 against that Cowboys team. And basically his workload on special teams basically evaporated, and Falcons did their best to limit him. We've talked before about how the Falcons are almost certainly going to do their best to keep him on a pitch count this summer. So you're probably not going to see Patterson practicing a ton. You'll probably get days off. You probably won't see any of Patterson in the preseason. I'm certain of that. 0 snaps, over under 0 snaps. Take the under. Negative snaps if Arthur Smith has anything to do with it. But what's interesting about Patterson, at least last year, he wasn't that effective as a kickoff return last year. And that was notable to me watching the film during the season, where it did feel like in the second half of the season, and maybe that was in conjunction with the overall improvement of the special teams, thanks to, our Lord and Savior, Thomas Morstead. But in the second half of the season, when Avery Williams took over as the Falcons kickoff return specialist, it did feel like the Falcons return game was a little bit better. Not by a huge degree, but certainly there's data to point that the Falcons starting field position was slightly better in the second half of the season with Williams returning kicks than it was earlier in the season with Patterson. And then when you look at some of the advanced metrics, like from Pro Football Focus and Football Outsiders, they seem to back up this trend. Like PFF had Patterson graded as the 41st best kickoff returner in the league last year out of 42 kickoff returners. Avery Williams was second in their grades last year. Football Outsiders had Patterson as the 5th worst kickoff return guy based off of their value over average metric. I don't know exactly where Williams ranked, but he was in the top 20 somewhere between 11 and 20. And so we know that Patterson will be better and fresher if he can be saved on kickoff returns. And so it begs the question, will the Falcons be a better football team if Patterson is not returning kicks this year? Are the Falcons really hurting themselves by letting Patterson try to go and break this record? And again, it's tough, right? Because if Patterson does break the record and he takes one to the house, it's all worth it. Doesn't matter if he's worse than Williams on every average kick. That one kickoff return for a touchdown will make it all worth it. We know there's a 3% chance of him taking one to the house. That's his career, in terms of how many touchdowns he has versus how many returns he has. And so is that 3% chance worth it? I don't know. Again, I don't know what more value Williams is bringing as a kickoff return. Is it 2%? Is it 3%? Is it 5%? Whatever that number is, that's something for more advanced metrics that I don't necessarily have the know-how to show, but it's notable. While Patterson's kickoff return average was 24 and Williams was like 21, something like that. So on paper, it looks like Patterson was the better guy, but that 24 average yards per kickoff return last year was significantly lower than Patterson's career average, which was basically 30 yards per attempt in the 8 years prior to that. And we've noticed in the past where you take these kickoff return guys and put them more on offense, as the Browns did with Josh Cribbs, as the Bears did with Devin Hester in past years. And it does seem to correlate highly with those guys having a dip in production as return specialists the more you use them on offense, right? Hester's a great example of that. His first 2 years in the NFL, he had 7 combined punt return touchdowns, 4 combined kickoff return touchdowns. His third years, the Bears were basically like, let's try to feature you more on offense, make you our number 2, number 3 wide receiver. And his punt return average, his average per punt return basically was half what it was his first 2 years, those next 2 years. And he did not have a return touchdown in those 2 years, either as a punt returner or a kicker returner. In fact, he never had another kickoff return touchdown. He had one more kickoff return touchdown throughout the rest of his career. He did bounce back as a punt return and started taking more to the house later in his career. But it does seem like there's a correlation between, if you want Patterson to have his best year offensively, then that means minimizing his opportunities on special teams, at least based off of that information. Or if you want him have a chance to break that kickoff return touchdowns, maybe that means dialing back his offensive usage this upcoming season. And so that's another reason why you may want Tyler Allgeier to sort of hit the ground running on offense, to sort of take more of that workload off of his shoulders as an offensive weapon, so that the Falcons can maximize potentially Patterson on special teams. So I'm curious where you guys sort of fall on that sort of scale, in addition to the 2-15 stuff. So do you think it's worth Patterson getting that opportunity, or do you feel like seeing if Avery Williams gives this offense a slightly better chance with field position will lead to success? And of course, you can leave a comment. Hit me up via email, lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or hit me up on Twitter or Facebook at Locked On Falcons to let me know your feedback on that. And tomorrow we should have a guest as the Falcons break their first practice of training camp and sort of get that guest reactions to that. I need to confirm with that, so I won't necessarily say who that person is, but I'll reach out to that person tonight. Hopefully we'll confirm that. But we'll have some guests on that will be there on hand for the Falcons' first couple of practices this week to get their thoughts, their observations as the rest of this week unfolds, guys. And I appreciate you for tuning in for another episode. I'm going to have to take down that picture at some point, at least, for a while, and then when, whatever happens, it's tough. It's a dark day once again for being Atlanta Falcons. No joy, but hopefully, we'll get some sooner versus later, or maybe we won't, and the Falcons will go 2-15, or whatever the case may be. So I'm done talking, guys. Thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen. Always recommend your second listens. In addition to Locked On Sports Atlanta, you can check out Locked On Braves, Locked On Hawks, Locked On Bulldogs, as well as Locked On NFL to get all the latest on all the latest happenings going on around the NFL, including a certain wide receiver signing with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, guys, I really appreciate it. Till then.